All right, go for it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, people, wherever in the world you are. It is Friday. We have a special broadcast here with a gentleman who needs no introduction, a man who is an absolute voice of clarity and reason in this chaotic world, none other than Harley Schlanger. Harley, welcome back, and it's glad to have you on.
I'm glad to be here. Sorry I missed you yesterday, but there were so many things going on and I was overscheduled.
Yeah, no problem, Harley. I mean, things happen, um, and not a problem. Sorry about that. I'm having some. All of a sudden, I'm getting these weird computer issues. All of a sudden, it's weird, Siege. Anyway, continue, Harley. Lots going on. Where do you want to? What yarn do you want to pull in this ball of yarns that we call global geopolitical, the global geopolitical realm?
Well, let's start with something that's gotten very little coverage in the United States, not surprisingly, which is the visit of the French President Macron to China. Now, you can say what you will about Macron, and there's still a lot of questions about him. He does have a connection to the Rothschild Bank. He certainly was used to run against the populism, so called, that was taking over in Europe. But he did something yesterday, which was, or not yesterday, this last week, which was really quite amazing. He went to China and he put himself forward as a representative of Europe. Now, when the Chinese had the Belt and Road Conference last May, the European Union representatives were the most sour and negative in the whole hall there. And the European Union has been passing laws against China. They've been warning about China is going to take over computer industry, the rail industry, this and that. The Germans are doing everything they can to try and keep the Chinese out. But Macron went there and he said, we welcome the Belt and Road. And he said, let's face it, in the West, our economies are tired. They're worn down. He said, our banks aren't functioning, our industries aren't working, and you in China have created a miracle. You've lifted 700 to 800 million people out of poverty. We can learn something from you. Now, this was greeted by the Western media as saying Macron is pandering to China. Macron is going there hat in hand to try and sell some airplanes. That's nonsense. Macron is someone who does read the way the wind is blowing. And right now in Europe, the EU is stuck in a terrible situation. The euro keeps appreciating because all the other currencies are collapsing, but the European economies are on the edge. And so what Macron has done is identify a potential for Europe for the future. Now, he immediately, actually before he left for China, he spoke with President Trump. When he was back in France, he called Trump to report to him. And apparently, the two of them have worked out some kind of discussion process about how to proceed with a Western link with the Chinese New Silk Road. So, this is quite significant. It doesn't solve the problems of the euro at all. In fact, what Macron is going to find is that his buddies at the EU are against this because you cannot sustain the existing bubble in the West and link up with the New Silk Road because the New Silk Road is outside of the bubble in the West, and the Chinese don't want bubble financing on the Silk Road.
Right. Very, very important thing that you just brought forth to us right now, Harley. It's interesting to see that Macron is all of a sudden he's the emissary of the EU. He's going to definitely, just what you said, he's going to find himself at odds as soon as he gets back to Brussels, especially now that, Brussels is still playing lackey to Washington, D.C., and we don't even know exactly what the heck is totally going on in D.C. in and of itself, Harley.
Well, that's the big question, and I think there's a reason for that. I think Trump has been fairly clear on what he's trying to do,
Right.
but it doesn't get out there because all you hear is Trump having to fight the deep state. Now, what's important about what Macron is doing is that you have no government in Germany. There was an agreement yesterday to reach an agreement. Now, this is the third time that's happened since the elections. It's been what is it? It's about 8 or 12 weeks or 4 months since the German elections were, I think, in September. So there's been no government in Germany for the last 4 months. Germany is supposedly the motor of Europe. Now, what happened yesterday is there was a meeting between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, and also the coalition partner of the Christian Democrats, the Christian Social Union.
Right.
And what they came out with was, well, we're going to work on a number of areas where we can find agreement. What they found is they disagree on tax policy, they disagree on EU policy, on European integration policy. They disagree on, in some cases, the CSU disagrees with the CDU, even though they've been partners for 40 years. The CSU doesn't like the anti-nuclear policy and the anti-coal policy of the CDU. Merkel has become about as green as a green tomato. So you have a big fight still in Germany. Now, when Macron came back, he immediately went to Rome for a meeting with the Mediterranean countries of the European Union. And every single one of them is enthusiastic about trade with China. Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, they've all worked out their own agreements with China. The Greeks and the Italians had their own private discussion about their ports with the Chinese rail system. So you have this shift underway. Eastern Europe is moving toward joining the Silk Road. The Germans and the French who were holding out, the EU holding out, and now the French have suddenly shifted sides. Now, the deeper importance here is not just the question of trade and the Chinese investing in infrastructure in Europe. The deeper issue is what Macron said. The Western financial system has cracked, a bubble on a bubble. And smart people know it's not going to last. Although, as I'm sure you see from New York, everyone's falling all over themselves to say, well, we don't know how long the bubble's going to last, but we're going to take advantage of it right down to the last moment.
Yeah.
And of course, what happens when the last moment comes?
They get caught. They never get out.
That's right. So Macron is looking for an option. Now, Theresa May is continuing to flounder, and I think Trump wisely decided to cancel his trip to Britain. He has nothing to gain from going there. You have a bunch of crazies will be out in the street protesting against him. May doesn't really have much of a government put together. No one's sure whether she's really serious about following through with Brexit or not. So you have all these uncertainties. What's not uncertain is the Chinese are continuing to push ahead with trade agreements in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and that Trump has been fighting and I think has now gotten the upper hand on the deep state. But this deep state operation, this Mueller investigation, has to be deep sixed. You got to get rid of it because as long as it's there, Trump has two problems. One is that you've got a bunch of crazy Democrats who are going to do anything they can to try and get rid of him. And then you have Republicans who are the austerity Republicans who are going to oppose anything Trump tries to do, which breaks with the old Bush and Obama policies of Wall Street. What's been hemmed in. And that's why it looks like they're backing down on the infrastructure question again. Although at the meeting last weekend in Camp David, a Trump aide came out and said that Trump is saying, just spend damn money to get these projects going. And that's the right thing to do. So, we'll see if he can find some openings on this fight against Mueller and Comey and the whole deep state. It makes a big difference. Now, on that there's a really significant development. Again, it hasn't been reported much, but Joe DeGeneva, the former U.S. attorney from Washington, D.C., fairly well-known former prosecutor, did an interview on WMAL, the main talk station in Washington, D.C., I believe on Monday. And what he said, he went through a whole series of points on the illegal operations against Trump and the campaign. And I'll just give you a couple quotes from him because, again, this has not gotten out in the media generally, but it's really sharp what he said. He said that Mike Rogers, the NSA head, discovered in early 2016 that the Justice Department and FBI were doing illegal surveillance against the Trump campaign. Rogers then found it was being conducted under 702 of the FISA Act, which, by the way, was just re-upped yesterday in an act of treason by the Congress.
Huh.
Rogers ordered an audit, and they discovered multiple violations of federal law. When Clapper and Brennan, who were conducting this illegal operation, found out what Rogers was doing, they tried to get him. Instead, Rogers went and briefed Trump on it on November 17th. And that's when
I remember that.
Yeah, and he moved his headquarters out of Trump Tower to New Jersey to his golf course. And he came out and said, I've been wiretapped, and the media made fun of it. But DeGeneva said now Rogers has gone totally public on this.
Wow.
Now, here are some of the quotes from DeGeneva. He said, there's a day of reckoning for the Department of Justice and the operatives under Loretta Lynch. He said that what we're seeing in motion is a coup d'etat. It was started as an attempt to spy on a president-elect because they didn't like him. He said the Obama administration used FISA warrants against Trump based on the dossier of Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS, which was paid for by Hillary's campaign.
Right.
He said they lied to the FISA committee to get the warrants. And he concluded this 12-minute segment on the radio by saying, the real treason here was not by the Trump campaign or the Trump-elect presidency, but by people at the Justice Department and the FBI who conspired to frame an incoming president of the United States with false crimes. And he said that Comey is dead meat. Brennan, who was the most corrupt CIA director ever, and that's saying a lot.
That is saying a lot.
In prison. So, again, how many people hear these things? Well, if you were in Washington, D.C. listening to the morning drive time, you heard it. But is this reported in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or anywhere else?
Never.
And so this is encouraging Trump to be more direct. In his interview yesterday with the Wall Street Journal, he said, people who are moving against me are committing treason. He said, there's no collusion, but when I say there's no collusion, they say that's obstruction. So I think we're coming to a head.
And then when he says it's obstruction, then they say that that's collusion.
Yeah, exactly. So what I wrote, I just wrote an article and I said, there was meddling in the election campaign and there was collusion. The meddlers were British intelligence, to a certain extent Israeli intelligence, and the colluders were the Clinton campaign, the FBI, the national security advisor to Obama, Obama himself, and the CIA. And that's, as DeGeneva said, is the treason that's being committed in this country.
Wow.
Now, one other point, when we look at this whole thing, and you look at the way they've tried to stop Trump from doing what he wants to do, I think we'll find out in the next couple of days what he and Macron talked about, but I'm sure there are going to be more discussions with Putin and Xi Jinping about the Silk Road in the next couple of days. But look at the situation with North Korea. Yeah. All of a sudden, the diplomacy, the diplomatic track is online, and the president of South Korea, President Moon, on his New Year's address to the South Korean people, said that President Trump deserves all the credit for this. It was Trump's initiatives that enabled this new diplomacy to occur. Was that in the New York Times? Was that in the Washington Post or CNN?
Nope. Not at all.
What are they covering? They're still saying that Tillerson's going to be forced out, when in fact Tillerson is doing an extremely effective job in his work with the Russians on Syria and his work on North Korea. The Wall Street Journal ran a big story the other day saying the U.S. Pentagon is wargaming Korea. Is it going to be a big attack, a small attack? And Mattis came out and said, look, we're working on diplomacy. So we're just inundated with lie after lie. I mean, one time LaRouche said, what's the mainstream media? The mainstream media is the what comes out of the sewer. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Absolutely correct, man. It's sedition, what the media is doing. Absolute sedition. I mean, everything from having these quack doctors appearing on their news programs claiming that I've diagnosed Donald Trump. He's mentally unfit, and it's the most incredible thing, violating even the American Psychiatric Association's ethics guidelines of trying to diagnose somebody without actually even sitting down and doing and running a proper diagnosis without even having to talk to the person. It's the craziest thing in the world, Harley. In an end of the country, like if this was in Russia, Putin would have these guys jailed and sent over to Siberia and have them shot. It's amazing these guys get away with this.
You're talking about Dr. Bandy Lee from Yale, who put together
that nut job.
Her book is called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And she's formed a grouping that says they are going to evade the guidelines of their profession because they have a duty to warn. And what she said is that Trump is about to implode. There must be legislation calling for an emergency examination of his mental health. They're using this book by a known fraudster, Wolf, to build the case that Trump is crazy. Now, while this is all the American people are hearing, Macron is talking with Trump about how to move together to develop Africa, to develop Asia, to work with China. The president of South Korea, who's right in the gun barrels of the North Koreans, is praising Trump for the potential for an opening for peace. Putin is continuing to say the problems we have with the United States are the legacy of Bush and Obama. And yet in the United States, all we hear is that Trump is childish, crazy, needs to be forced out. It really is. Now that I live in Germany, and I live in what used to be East Germany, I can tell you, when you talk to older people, they say this sounds like what the Stasi, the East German secret police during the communist times, used to do to control the population.
Right. Absolutely, and they're trying to do the same thing here. It's just not working. They're all this talk about the 25th Amendment when the average American has no clue what the 25th Amendment is. They have no idea. You cannot remove a president. It's too far gone. I think the only true liberal that makes sense in this whole entire thing was Alan Dershowitz when he appeared on Fox and Friends, when he really broke down the truth of the whole 25th Amendment thing and the unfit for command. I mean, he laid it out very clearly and succinctly that you simply cannot do these things, and the people that are espousing these things are being absolutely incredulous. This is sedition. It's treasonous.
Well, Dershowitz's exact statement was really quite interesting because he's not a big fan of Trump, but he is a constitutional scholar. And he said, when you disagree with someone's politics, you rail against them, you campaign against them. We don't use the psychiatric system against them. And he said, that's just dangerous.
Yeah, and while they do this, they think the American public doesn't seem to understand. They think that the American public is somehow believing in the mainstream media, which has a 6% approval rating among the population. Nobody believes these guys, and they're out there doing this. All they're doing is backing themselves up and painting themselves into a corner, Harley.
Well, they are. And the Washington Post, in its coverage of Macron, said that Macron is pandering, that China is a rejuvenated empire that's moving to take over the world. And it said the Chinese have an authoritarian regime that is using increasingly sophisticated techniques to spy on its population. Now, I read that and I scratched my head and I said, have they ever heard of Edward Snowden? Do they have an idea of how everyone is spying on in this country? Of course they do, because Bezos is part of the CIA now.
Yeah, AWS provides a great length of web space and server room for the intelligence cocaine import agency.
So, the good thing is that as all of this is coming out, you also have, there's so much more I could talk about. It's such a complex web of corruption that's being unraveled. But the Congress, there are people in Congress doing an excellent job going after people like Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS. Simpson, who initially insisted he would not testify in private. And then when the Republicans didn't immediately release the transcripts, he started protesting that they were suppressing his testimony. Then Feinstein releases the testimony. And Grassley makes the point, look, we wanted to hold it back because we were investigating to see how much of this we could confirm because we didn't want innocent people to be hurt. And Feinstein then apologized. She said, well, she's had a bad cold and she's been under a lot of pressure. And what did Trump call it? It wasn't sloppy Diane, but it was something. He had a term for her.
So, I forgot.
Yeah, it was sloppy Bannon, sloppy Steve. But
yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, Bannon is yesterday's news now. But when you look at what's happening in the Congress, the GPS was finally forced by court order to release documents. The Department finally released documents. The Inspector General has been pushing to release these documents because they're actually doing an honest job investigating the criminals at the FBI. I remember an old story I was told once by a cop on the beat who was talking about what's wrong with the FBI. And he said, they have a great PR department, but when it comes to catching criminals, they couldn't catch a cold. You look at the fact that the FBI failed to identify terror operations unless they run them.
Right.
This is an agency that should be shut down. The CIA has to be top to bottom cleaned out. Roger should be asked by Trump to stay because he seems to be a somewhat honest guy trying to shut down some of the things that were exposed by Snowden, whereas Brennan and others tried to shut down Snowden and WikiLeaks.
Absolutely. I truly believe, Harley, that the CIA and the FBI were purposely designed, I say in the last several decades, to be not only corrupt, but just grossly incompetent. I think it was purposely designed that way so those that are in power could get away with the type of shenanigans and criminal behavior that they've been getting away with for the last several decades.
Well, I'm not sure that incompetence, I think at the top, they actually have evil intent.
Yeah.
And they're competent in carrying out some of the evil intent. The problem is that you can't keep doing such bad things that destroy nations and kill people and then start to infect your own nation.
Right.
Without causing a spotlight to be put on you.
Sure.
And that's what we have to do. Writing articles for months on this, and now they're suddenly beginning to get out there. I wrote an article today on an update, some of what we've just gone through, and it's already up on about 6 or 7 websites. An article I wrote, I think I sent you the article I wrote on the economic crisis and the fraud of the stock market and so on. It went out on about 20 websites. So we're starting to get a volume of activity. My associates in Washington distributed the dossier on what a complete swine Mueller is to every congressional office. And then we got out a new report that we've written on the new Silk Road and the potential for the U.S. to adopt a real infrastructure program which will create jobs, innovation, feed entrepreneurial endeavors. And this went out to every congressional office. And I'll tell you, the reports I got, we had people in congressional offices who said, come back next week. I want to read this and I want to discuss it with you. That's new. Most of these guys only are interested in what the marching orders they get from CNN. Now they're buttonholing us and saying, come in and let's talk.
Wow. Yeah. That's huge. I mean, people see that mainstream information and mainstream media have completely lost their minds.
Yeah. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung had an article. This is a newspaper that's the center of the neoliberals in the banking community in Frankfurt.
Yeah.
They had been praising Macron to no end, just over and over and over after he got elected. And yesterday they ran a story saying Macron got hoodwinked by Xi Jinping.
Yes, I saw that. And that was not true.
No, it's not. I mean, he and Xi Jinping had a discussion just like Trump did. And, I think That's why the point I'd like to leave with your listeners today is if we can defeat this deep state operation, if we can put it into some deep burial ground somewhere and allow Trump to follow through on his initiatives, we may find that we're going to become part of this new dynamic that's sweeping the globe,
Right.
which is not based on funny money. It's not based on central bank swindles like Federal Reserve and European Central Bank and Bank of England propping up a bankrupt speculative market at the expense of real production. If we get rid of that, what's the potential for us? It's unlimited. It's the revival of the American system. This has been the lifelong fight of Lyndon LaRouche. I've been at his side for many, many years. And what I'm seeing now is something that's new. In spite of all the attacks over the years on Lyndon LaRouche, people are saying, well, on a few things he was right. Yeah, big things like getting a reserve, getting rid of these funny money policies, and so on. So it's a good time to be alive, and I hope people are looking forward to a year of more shocking revelations and potential change.
Absolutely. Harley, thank you so much for being on with us, and thank you for sharing this vital and important information with all of us here that are listening. What are your closing comments, and finally, how can people your website and stuff? How can people follow you?
Well, my closing comment is we've got a winnable fight on our hands, and we need more people in the fight. And what I'd like to do is, if your listeners are interested in getting more in-depth material from me, they can send directly to me at harleysch@gmail.com a request for my articles, and I'll send you the most recent articles and get you the link to my new blog site. So it's Harley, HARLEY SCH @gmail.com. I've had a very good, lively dialogue with some of your supporters, and I'd like to just keep expanding that.
Absolutely. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much for coming on with us. And as always, man, it is always a pleasure and an honor to have you on. We're humbled to have you on. Thank you so much. With that being said, CJ, take care, Harley. Enjoy your weekend. And thank you all for listening in. Enjoy y'all's weekends. CJ, take it away.